Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 282 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Wiley. And today's episode is on what is a expert witness for psychologists? And it is Sunday, the 11th of August 2024 as I record this. So today's episode is a really fun one because we're taking the forensic psychology topic of what is an expert witness, which is someone who testifies in courts and in both criminal and civil cases. And we're going to merge it with the clinical psychology topic, but also an academic topic, simply because an expert witness can be an academic, it can be an applied psychologist, like a forensic psychologist or a clinical psychologist. So this is going to be a really useful and a really insightful episode, which is where what is an expert witness, also what are the sort of things that an expert witness is actually meant to do, both in criminal cases and in civil cases too. So it's a really useful podcast episode that is going to open your eyes to a massive wide range of possibilities and maybe a future career option. So you got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, the benefits of putting down roots. Moving house is often cited as a highly stressful event, so it tracks that moving house frequently is likely to take a cumulative toll on someone's mental health. Similarly, we know that living in areas of high deprivation in childhood is linked to poor mental health outcomes later in life. The ways in which the two interrelate is explored in a massive new study in JAMA Psychiatry. Using data from now I'm not going to read that full number because that's a big number. Let's just do 1.1 million people born in Denmark between January 1st, 1982 and December 31st, 2003. Clive Sibyl and colleagues from Arkham University, Plymouth and Manchester find that it's not just living in highly deprived neighbourhoods that impact children's mental health. Moving house also increases the risk of developing depression later in life, regardless of where they're moving to or from. Okay, so this study is definitely quite a good one. One, the population size. The research sample size is absolutely brilliant. I mean, that's actually really impressive that they've done that. I mean, God, the amount of resources, the amount of coordination that requires, that's massive. Well done to those researchers. I mean, having to manage that many people must be challenging, so amazing work. Really, really amazing work, though. Plus, it's a longitudinal study, which I always like because it means that you can see how behavior changes over time. And I think to some extent, you can sort of do more of a cause and effect relationship. Of course, this is still correlational research because you cannot definitively prove that moving causes the depression symptoms to actually develop. And to be honest, I highly doubt, of course, it's simply just the moving that causes it. There's likely to be millions of other smaller factors, or to be fair, much bigger factors that actually contribute to children developing depression later on. But I also think that the finding itself is quite interesting in terms of that moving house. It is I suppose it can be quite like stressful for like certain people there because I mean like when I moved house, I didn't find it like that stressful. So I definitely think it depends on the type of person you are, how much you're moving. That definitely adds like to the stress and a whole bunch of other factors. So it's a good study. I think it's really good research from the little bit that I've like read of it. 1.1 million people. I'm still in awe of these researchers. So the second one is the creeping influence of doom scrolling. Spending hours on your phone looking at miserable news stories to many feels easier than ever. Obsessively looking at negative content online, also known as doom scrolling, can both feel horrendous in the moment and also really difficult to stop. Taking in so much awful news hits many people on a deeper level than passing sadness. Writing in computing in human behavior reports, Rexa Shamba and colleagues look at the broader effects of the doomscrolling from an existential perspective, exploring what it does to our view on human nature and our beliefs about what gives life meaning. They find that the effects of the doomscrolling reach well beyond the time with our screens and can make us more generally pessimistic about the world. Okay, so I definitely think that the main takeaway from this psychology news article is do not doom scroll or try and prevent yourself as much as possible. And yes, I know that's a lot easier said than done. Like, I don't think I've ever done it that bad because my news consumption tends to be I don't consume news on social media because, as the riots prove in the UK, you really can't trust that much on like social media because it tends to be fake and it tends to be lies. So I always tend to only look at trusted media sources, and even that I only do 2 or 3 times a day. Yeah, well, a day though. So yeah, so I think doom scrolling. If you are doom scrolling quite a lot, then I would sort of suggest you look into ways to stop it, just because it does have a really negative impact on our mental health. But this also shows that if it makes you more pessimistic about the world, then this actually has broader implications than mental health. Health, though, in the terms of cognitive processes, because doom scrolling is having some sort of impact on our cognitive processes, which makes them more negatively biased, which, because we're more pessimistic, feeds into our mental health in a terms of like the cognitive triad. Yeah, like if I were going to take like the oppression for an example. So doom scrolling is not good. If you are doom scrolling, definitely try and find ways to stop it. I think. The final point that I want to make on this is that this is a good example about how our cognition, our mental processes, and our behavior is changing, and because we're living in a digital world. Because I mean, before, I mean, like pre-internet, you couldn't doom scroll. Sure, you could flick through the newspaper, but then at some point you're going to run out of the newspaper and you're going to run out of bad things to look at. So I think this is definitely a consequence of the modern age, and I think this is just another example about how the internet is flat out amazing, and I love the internet. I never want it to go away, but there are downsides, which is why all new technologies, or to be honest, all technologies, period, are like double-edged swords. So the final one is, does a good story get in the way of the truth? Open quote. Humans are storytellers. Before there was recorded history, there were oral traditions, some of which, such as Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, endured long enough to enter into the written language and then printed. And a part of what enabled that oral tradition was story, the use of narrative forms that both brought to life what was being conveyed and made it easier to remember and pass on. So it's hardly surprising that academic researchers who are excited about and interested in their topic often convey what they're searching for and what they have found as a story. In fact, early career researchers are often told that they need to make sure their data tells a good story. But is this focus on telling a story a good thing, a bad thing, or a bit of both? How much is it our job as psychologists and researchers to change minds? Close quote. Join Marcus Mather, the Psychologist Associate Editor for Research, as he ponders the role of storytelling in the science communication in his latest piece. Okay, so this is actually a really good last one. One, because I'm a fiction writer and I do make money from telling stories, selling books, and creating intellectual property. So I definitely think that the idea of a good story in terms of academic research, I do see the problem. Because even though I've not read this piece, it is on my to-do list. I've actually got the magazine still in the envelope, back in like Canterbury because I've actually got to look at that, like at some point. But I definitely see the issue because if we focus so much on telling stories and if we make it engaging, then you've got to cut stuff out. You've got to word stuff in certain ways just to make it engaging. 'Cause let's face it, academic research is boring, even to us aspiring and qualified psychologists. It just is, especially if it's a topic you aren't that interested in. So I think we all know this from our psychology undergrads and our postgraduate studies. That there are just certain things you're meant to read and you cannot get into it because it is so dull though. So I think it's even more boring for lay people and people who don't read academic stuff very often. So if you want to make it engaging, then you have got to focus on the storytelling aspects. However, the question in this article is it our job as psychologists and as researchers to tell good stories? I think the answer is yes and no, and I do understand that is probably a very annoying answer, simply because I got some peer review feedback other week, and the interesting thing about it was that it was for a social science journal, so it wasn't strictly for psychology. But the interesting thing about it was that there was an emphasis on telling a story, getting your writing style across, which is something I've never really explored when it comes to academic stuff. Fiction and my own non-fiction, in terms of like books, always like to do that. But when it comes to academic stuff, I've always slightly been discouraged against that. So that was quite interesting. And the whole peer review feedback did focus on the storytelling idea that were to actually make it not engaging and make it more thought provoking. Just the people wanted to read it, they wanted to share it, and they wanted to remember it. So I definitely think in academia, this is something that we do focus on simply because we want our work to be enjoyed. We want our work to be read and shared, and we want it to be cited. So I think making it engaging and making sure it tells a good story is important. But then, as I've said, that you've got to cut stuff, you've got to word stuff in sometimes creative ways, and that's not lying. It's just you've got to word it in a way that makes it engaging. So I think this can be a problem, especially if it means that you aren't telling the full truth or the absolute truth. But at the end of the day, this is an issue that I don't think I can solve in this psychology news section because we do want our stuff to be engaging. We want it to be read, and we've got to be cited. So I think this is a much broader issue that we've all got to think about. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the person update. So moving on to the personal update. So this week's been really busy, really good, filled with lots of different projects. For example, I'm actually home like this weekend to try to see my parents and also see like different family members. And whilst I've been doing lots of like different bits and pieces, there's only two really relevant things that I actually want to focus on. So the first one comes directly back to psychology, because this week I'm finally starting to work on my second academic paper for a research study that data collection ended in May, or it might have actually been April. Yeah, to be honest, to make myself feel good, I'm gonna say that the data collection ended in May, so it's only 3 months ago, not 4 months ago. So I've been really procrastinating about this paper because I've been busy doing other stuff. But I want to do all of it, including data analysis, writing up by the end of August. So I've got about 19 days left, which, to be honest, because it's me, I should be able to do that quite quickly. Quickly though, I've been really procrastinating about it. Then I wrote down everything that I needed to do. Most of it is just data analysis because this study is quite big and it's got a lot of like moving parts. Even though it's just a quadrix questionnaire, there's a lot of different things that I need to do for it. So between the data analysis, the writing up of the different sections of the paper, I've managed to narrow it down to there's 55 things that I need to do for it. So personally, that really helps me because it means that I can see what I need to do. And so I've written it down on a piece of paper, and when it's done, I can highlight it. So I've done about 15 different bits and pieces. So as long as I start chipping away at it every day, then I should be able to do something, thankfully, over time. But it's a lot of fun and I do enjoy research. So to be honest, whilst I have no intention of doing it as a career, I am enjoying doing these different studies, doing data analysis and writing out for the final report. So the reason why I'm telling you this is that just so that if you're really procrastinating about something, whether it's a piece of coursework, whether it's writing up an entire academic paper, or doing some sort of data analysis, break it down into smaller chunks so you can visually see what you need to do and just chip away at it. Even if you do one thing a day, at some point it will really start to add up though. It's better to be consistent and not do too much than procrastinate for ages, do tons, and then procrastinate again about it. Just be consistent, chip away at it, and it will be done in the end. And that's something that really helps me. So I hope that you find it useful too. And also, I did some really fun student ambassador work this week. So what happened was that at my university, it's a space school. So this is when a wide range of different students, I think there's 14 to 18-year-olds. So what they do is that they come into the university for 5 days. They do some rocket design. They do a whole bunch of space stuff. And on Thursday, which was day 2, what they did was they did something called a reverse pitches funding panel. So the students pretended to be different space agencies and different funding bodies, like the European Space Agency, UK Space Agency. Then there was some research. Then they pretended to be some UK research councils, and me and 5 other ambassadors, 3 of which were actual physics students. We had to do a mock research proposal pitch to the students about our research and our idea, though. So the research had to be space related. So even though I was the only person doing psychology and basically nothing that was technical. The only other student who wasn't physics, he did was computer science. So basically, still the same sort of stuff in terms of space technology. But psychology was not, and he was actually really confused about why I was there. But I got selected and I actually wanted to do it. So my one was a water-based propulsion system. So In short, using the chemical reaction between hydrogen and oxygen to create thrust to get rockets up into space. I love that project. And because I named it after myself, or a variation of my name, what happened was that the students really liked it. That because my project was a lot more memorable, and also because of the particular name that I chose for the project. So the other ambassadors were reminding the students of the name during their presentations, and I was actually a really good public speaker. Normally, I'm actually quite horrific at public speaking, but I was really good like this time round, and the students were hanging on to my every word. So, it turns out I actually won because what happened, and it's also worth mentioning that each group got the equivalent of £20,000 to allocate to different research projects. So in that room, there was £160,000 up for grabs. Of course, it's fake money, but still. So the fifth project got £9,000. The next one got about £15,000. Both of them were physics students. The next one was the computer science person. He got £21,000. Then the person who came second got £28,000. Now the person who was leading this just sort of paused there and let us realise, wow, that's nowhere near £160,000. And then my name got called out because I'd won, and the students allocated me £74,000 for my research project because they liked it that much, which was brilliant, and everyone was quite surprised, including like myself there, because we all wanted to win. It got a bit competitive and like tense as the scores were like being read out though. But it was a lot of fun, and it was just like a laugh though. And I'm actually quite impressed that I managed to beat all the physics students in their own project pitches, which was like great fun. And as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi Whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And you can always leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn. And today's episode has been sponsored by Police Psychology, a forensic psychology guide to police behaviour. So I flat out love this book because this is really eye-opening, it's really engaging, and this is just such a fun book that I really do recommend that you read, especially if you want to understand certain things about the police. For example, the institutionalized racism, homophobia, sexism, and cop culture, because this book does help you to understand organizational cultures which exist in all workplaces and how they shape individual attitudes, behaviors, and how can they lead to a cop culture, which is where the institutionalized negative attitudes that comes in them. So it's really in like important, it's really engaging. Then we also talk about the cognitive interview, police interview techniques, armed response units, and also we talk about police mental health, and a whole bunch of other really brilliant topics that I'm really excited about. Police psychology is basically just really nice to try to understand why do the police behave as they do, what are the psychological mechanisms, and what are the research findings that can help to explain some of the police brutality that we see in the news, and a whole bunch of other topics. So if you're interested in forensic psychology and you want to understand why the police behave as they do, then definitely check it out. So there's Police Psychology, a forensic psychology guide to police behaviour, available for all major ebook retailers, and you can get the hardback and the paperback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. And you can also get the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence at selected audiobook retailers like Kobo, Spotify, Google Play, Barnes& Noble, and selected library systems like Bibliotheca, Baker and Taylor, and Overdrive. So, whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So, if you wanted to support the podcast on a monthly basis, which you can start and stop at any time, and get tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you wanted to support the podcast on a one-off basis, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Con Wiley. So that's enough for your personality. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what is an expert witness for psychologists. It's a lot of fun, so let's dive into it. What is an expert witness? Expert witnesses help jurors as well as judges in criminal and civil cases to learn about certain topics. For example, when the R. Kelly case went to trial when he was accused of sexual violence, sexual exploitation, and coercive control, it raised a lot of questions within society that ultimately impacted the jury's ability to understand what was going on in the case. For example, people couldn't understand how R. Kelly had managed to persuade his victims to stay in his home. Sometimes this went on for years. Therefore, both sides of a legal battle are likely to bring in expert witnesses because they help to strengthen their case. In addition, expert witnesses can base their testimony on scientific, technical, or specialized knowledge. As a result, when it comes to domestic abuse cases, expert witnesses, like a psychologist, can help judges and jurors to understand how domestic abuse isn't caused by the victim's actions, mental health conditions, anger, substance abuse, or jealousy. Personally, I think one of the most important aspects of those of expert witnesses is that they help the court to understand what victim survivors do to survive. This thankfully helps the victims from being blamed or pathologized for the consequences of their abuse. Since if we take my own sexual assault for example, even though I'd never reported it to the police, which is something around 90% of sexual violence victims do, I can imagine that a defense solicitor would try to paint me as a so-called crazy, unstable person with my panic attacks, PTSD, and intense social anxiety that my trauma caused. Thankfully, expert witnesses made that argument null and void and helped survivors get the justice they deserved instead of being blamed and discredited for their trauma. As I always say, trauma responses are normal reactions to extremely abnormal situations. Furthermore, for a psychologist to become an expert witness, a judge reviews the expert's credentials and then the judge agrees to admit their testimony into evidence before the expert witness is allowed to speak. Then the lawyer who engaged the expert questions them first, then the other lawyer gets to cross-examine. Finally, for this section, an expert witness, like a psychologist, can testify in two different ways. Firstly, they can testify in case-specific ways. This means the expert witnesses write a report and often testify to the facts of a specific case. Then the psychologist reviews the associated material. This can include medical or police reports, psychological evaluations, guardian and litigant reports, relevant photos or records of the text, as well as court documents. Then the psychologist might conduct a domestic violence / coercive control interview and assessment with the alleged victim. The final way is for an expert witness to testify according to general expertise. which is when an expert doesn't know that much about the specific case, but they testify about domestic abuse or whatever the case is about more generally. In terms of the lawyers, the lawyer can still ask what if or hypothetical questions that show how the information might pertain to the case currently on trial. Personally, I remember watching the Depp versus Amber Heard case, and Elizabeth Lotus was an expert witness, I think. Therefore, even if you're a very academically focused psychologist, you could still become an expert witness if you want to. And no, I don't know off the top of my head how do you actually build yourself up to become an expert witness so people call on you. Because of your research area. For example, Elizabeth Lotus is a legendary researcher when it comes to memory, so she gets called in as an expert witness to testify on memory and false memories. So let's explore these two types of a testimony in a little more depth. How might psychologists be used in case-specific testimony? If a psychologist becomes an expert witness to give case-specific testimony, then the psychologist can discuss a range of topics on the stand and under oath. For example, the possible cultural influences on the case, the specific coercive control and domestic abuse tactics used by the abuser, the different ways the survivor tried to moderate the abuse so the survivor could protect themselves and maybe others. Also, a psychologist can talk about the natural history of the couple from the time they met until the present day. Since newsflash, abuse rarely happens automatically in domestic violence and coercive control cases. In addition, psychologists can discuss with judges and juries the impact of the abuse on children and other family members, as well as the medical, psychological, and financial impact of the abuse on the survivor. Also, the psychologists can talk about what they found after doing a domestic violence and coercive control assessment on the survivor, and they can give recommendations for custody and visitation. And psychologists can discuss the validity of previous evaluations and assessments done by other professionals. Personally, I know I got this idea from TV, so I don't know how it really works in real life, but I would flat out love to be in a courtroom when a psychologist is ripping to shreds the evaluation and assessment done by a previous professional. Now, I don't know why I want to see that, but I think it would be interesting at least to see. How might psychologists be used in general expertise testimony? Whereas if a psychologist becomes an expert witness and they're called in to give general expertise testimony, then there's a good chance they'll help the court understand the definitions of the issue and explanations as to why they occur, such as what is domestic violence and why does domestic violence occur. Also, the psychologist can help the court understand the research on coercive control, as well as domestic violence, and explanations as to why a victim might lie, recant their statements, or comply with, stay, or defend the abuser. In addition, psychologists can teach the judge and jury about the impact of a trauma on a child, on child and adult witnesses and victims, how abuse can change in severity and frequency over time, and the consequences that victims face when they try to protect themselves or their children. As well as psychologists can teach them about the beliefs, characteristics, tactics, behaviors, and motivations of offenders too. Ultimately, you can think of psychologists in a general expertise as mythbusters. I see expert witnesses as helping the jury to realise a lot of the things that we've heard about abuse, sexual violence, and victims are wrong because of the myths that we've created for ourselves in society. For example, the disgusting myths that if a woman was actually raped, she would fight back and never stay with her attacker. And yes, that is a massive myth. Psychologists are critical for dispelling these myths. How might psychologists or other expert witnesses be used in civil cases? Whilst, like everyone, my mind only thinks of psychologists acting as expert witnesses in criminal cases, they are sometimes used in civil cases. For example, when it comes to pre- and post-nuptial agreements or other contracts. An expert witness can evaluate whether this contract was signed under coercion, and if that is the case, then the contract should be set aside. In other words, it should be ignored by the law. And as someone who has a minor interest in contract law, that is a very interesting idea. Another way how psychologists and other expert opinions can be used in civil cases is in immigration cases. Since it's often the case that a domestic abuse survivor's immigration status case tied to their parents or an asylum seeker needs relief from deportation because they often face domestic homicide or another violent fate if they're sent home. So expert witnesses can be useful in these cases for different reasons. Thirdly, divorce cases can require expert witnesses to help the court understand the need to protect survivors from custody or divorce agreements that would enable further abuse or put them at even more risk, as well as civil benefit cases of another type where expert witnesses are useful because during divorce proceedings a survivor might be scared to talk about their rights to half of their abuser's assets or retirement pay. Therefore, an expert witness can help a survivor recover these benefits even after a time has passed, sometimes long after divorce proceedings. Ultimately, in torn cases, expert witnesses can help survivors sue their abuser for damages that have occurred over time. Now, this is a tricky one, because this is only applicable in certain jurisdictions, and expert witnesses, like psychologists, are useful for explaining how the harm of the abuse can be established as a basis for compensation. Similarly, expert witnesses are useful for educating juries on why abusers might file constant court petitions to harass, control, and impoverish their victim. These types of other cases are called litigation abuse or vexus abuse. Lastly, expert witnesses can be seen in family court during custody and visitation discussions, since an expert can describe to the jury the evidence of domestic abuse and explain the victim's survival behaviours, as well as, when this is relevant, the expert witness can offer a fact-based opinion about any potential danger there is to the child or children if the abuser gains a custody or unsupervised visitation rights. Also, experts can counter any claims of parental alienation syndrome, where the abuser's lawyers try to wrestle custody away from a protected parent. Conclusion. Part of me would love to become an expert witness in the future. I've thought that for years, and whilst I admit I have a very idealized version of life as an expert witness, I think it would be fun. Yeah, between what happened in my childhood, my sexual violence experience, my stuttering at times, which is made worse by stress, not including my PTSD, I don't think this is something in my future. I seriously don't. However, it's still important that we learn about things in our psychology careers, even if we don't think we could do it, because something might change in the future. then that dismissed career option might become more appealing and exciting again. Overall, when a court needs a psychologist to help testify, whether through general expertise or case-specific expertise, we're still needed to help educate judges and juries to dispel myths and misconceptions that could impact the case. Ultimately, expert witnesses, and this can include psychologists at times, are needed to testify at grand jury hearings, trials, plea negotiations, sentencing, parole hearings, and clemency hearings without being on a side. Due to expert witnesses are simply there to tell the truth and educate people. We aren't fighting for sides. Expert witnesses are such a fundamental part of the criminal justice system. And whilst I'm the last person who would ever say the criminal justice system is fair, but I firmly believe that the expert witnesses and us telling the truth and educating judges and jurors, we help to bring that system just a little closer to that lofty ideal. And that is a win, and just another way how psychology helps to make the world a better place, one small step at a time. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did because I always love looking at forensic psychology topics, and this particular episode does draw on a lot of different ones, like academic research. It also draws on clinical psychology and psychology careers. And it's just fun to see the truth about what actually happens when you become an expert witness and how psychologists can help the criminal justice system. So if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Police Psychology, a forensic psychology guide to police behaviour, available in all the usual places, including the AI narrated audiobook, available from selected audiobook retailers and selected library systems. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please head on over to patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. If you want to give the podcast a bit of one-off support, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. So have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at connorwhiteley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.